For the new people, this is the caliber of speaker you get at CNP. Like, we're so grateful he's here, and this is what we're used to, frankly, a little spoiled. Let's bring our panel up. I'm going to introduce Tom Fitton, who is the chairman of our next panel, and then he can introduce you to everyone else, although they don't seem to be here. All right. You coming? No? You might have to talk amongst yourselves for just a minute. I don't know. I just wanted to say to Charmaine Yost, we will be in prayer for your son who's deployed. He's such a good young man, and I know we have, oh, here we go. Come on. We have other veterans in the room and people whose children deployed, so let's be in prayer. Come on up. So we have Tom Fitton. He's served as president of Judicial Watch since 1998 and helped turn it into America's largest and most effective government watchdog organization. He's the author of the New York Times bestsellers, Clean House, Exposing Our Government's Secret and Lies, and the Corruption Chronicles. Tom also serves on the executive committee of the Council for National Policy and is president of Coalitions of America, lives in D.C. with his wife Kelly and 3 daughters. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. We're here with Sidney Powell and Carter Page, who really need no introduction, and I'll talk a little bit about them later. But I would suggest this is the most important meeting we've ever had, in the sense this is one of the most serious crises our constitutional republic has faced in modern times, which is an unconstitutional coup-like assault on the President of the United States. The sedition began during the campaign. It continued just after his election. It continued during the first part of his administration. It didn't really start. The Mueller report was the last stab of that seditious conspiracy, but in many ways the baton was handed off to the Democrats in the House to continue to try to take out the President of the United States. Now, they learned a lesson from William Barr. The left is not stupid. They see what needs to be done when they lose a battle, and they change. Remember, William Barr saw the fraudulent Mueller report. He realized what it was about, taking out the President of the United States. And before it became public, he correctly characterized it in a way that destroyed its credibility. No collusion, no obstruction. Therefore, no impeachment off of it. You remember the left went crazy because Mueller was mischaracterizing the report. Well, the report indeed did show no collusion, no obstruction, and therefore they could get no impeachment. So they learned their lesson by changing the idea of a criminal leak into the form of a whistleblower complaint. You had the deep state operations of the CIA, White House, you name it, continue its illegal spying against the President of the United States, reviewing classified materials, including phone conversations he had with the President of Ukraine, probably spying on his associates who were involved in Ukraine as well, including Rudy Giuliani. And they recognized they had classified information they wanted to leak to try to damage President Trump. Of course, the underlying information was not damaging, and to leak it also directly would be criminal. So what do? You wrap it up, you gussy it up as a whistleblower complaint. You coordinate with Democrats in the House to make sure they know what the plan is, and you then mischaracterize the complaint, or you send out a complaint, you push out a narrative that mischaracterizes the underlying information to push forward their effort to drive the coup against President Trump. So what really undid that was the president being, as Judicial Watch likes government officials to be, transparent. He issued and unclassified the discussion he had with the president of Ukraine, which blew up that whole scheme, because they were depending on all of this material being secret and allowing them to proceed with the impeachment coup without any pushback with facts. And another major mistake they made was not admitting their collusion with the deep state operative that was leaking this information. Adam Schiff's office, and he had coordinated with the whistleblower, and rather than admit that initially as to how he knew about the complaint, he lied about it. and you don't lie about something that's innocent. You know, in Washington, they like you to believe the cover-up is worse than the crime. Actually, that's normally not the case. The crime's pretty bad. That's why they're covering it up. And that's what happened here. But don't think it's over, because the crisis continues. They are obviously still pushing for impeachment. That's not really impeachment in the sense the House hasn't authorized it. Everything that's happening in terms of this investigation is based on an illicit, in my view, criminal leak of information related to the president's communications with foreign leaders. They want to freeze the president from communicating with foreign leaders and doing his job as president, along with the Attorney General, in investigating the illegal spying on him, the coup cabal that was targeting him, the coup cabal that was targeting Carter Page, the coup cabal that was targeting General Flynn, while also protecting Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and now we know Joe Biden. So in many ways, this is about President Trump, but in other ways, it's about saving their own skins from accountability, both criminal and otherwise, for their conduct over the years. If I were the president, I would go to the Attorney General and demand a criminal investigation of the circumstances I just laid out to you. Deep state operatives, maybe within the CIA, spying on the president, creating a whistleblower complaint that it isn't a whistleblower. Look, I know whistleblowers. I've worked with whistleblowers. Whistleblowers have been friends of mine. Sirs and gentlewomen, these are no whistleblowers. And they need to be criminally investigated for their conduct. And if it means targeting a member of Congress for his involvement, so be it. Remember, the laws against the illegal dissemination and mishandling of classified information does not exclude members of Congress. It does not exclude members of Congress. So that initial communication that this deep state leaker had with Adam Schiff's staff and him necessarily involved the communication of classified information outside the law. That ought to be the topic of discussion. Adam Schiff previously has improperly handled classified information by confirming it outside the law, previously been caught dealing with witnesses in improper ways. Michael Cohen and who did he meet with? Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS, he met out in Colorado. So this is par for the course for Adam Schiff. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the left. It's bad enough they don't want to be prosecuted, but they've gone so far as to try to upend our republic in order to protect themselves from being prosecuted. I mean, it's one thing to run a PR campaign. It's one thing to do what politically connected or powerful individuals do if they're trying to avoid prosecution. But it doesn't mean you get to spy on people, violate their civil rights, put them in jail to keep yourself out of jail. Now, I'm disappointed, and I know Attorney General Barr, and the irony is, I don't think they have much to fear from prosecution. Everyone says, we got the IG report, we got the IG report. Well, let me tell you what the last IG report showed. James Comey went into then President-elect's office, Trump's office, after the day before, sitting in the Oval Office with Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Susan Rice, John Brennan, and the rest, talking about the dossier. And he admits in this IG report, I talked about confronting Trump with the dossier with my colleagues in the FBI and my colleagues in the deep state intelligence agencies. And it wasn't to brief him on something he needed to know about. It was to get information from him, to see what his reaction would be. He went in to spy on him because they considered him a target and a witness. He walks out of the office with President Trump, who denies it and is obviously outraged, and he goes down to his car. They've got a secure communications, a secure laptop. He starts typing up one of those infamous memos. He runs to the FBI field headquarters and briefs, according to the IG, over a secure video teleconference device those FBI agents running Crossfire Hurricane. This is where the IG protects the deep state. You know who's running Crossfire Hurricane? Peter Strzok and Lisa Page at the time. That was a spy operation against the President of the United States. And of course, he took those FBI files, those memos he wrote, he stole them, kept them at his house, mishandled them because they were classified, so that showed mishandling. He shared that improperly with his, quote, lawyers who weren't really lawyers, authorized their leak to the New York Times, and the Attorney General of the United States couldn't figure out a way to prosecute him. Compare and contrast that with Paul Manafort, who was subject to an early morning raid by the Mueller gang, guns drawn, so they could photograph the man's suits to justify a mortgage fraud charge at the federal level. How many mortgage fraud prosecutions did you bring in the 100 cases you've prosecuted? 0. So they've got the evidence of the coup in this IG report, and we're expected to believe they're going to come up with a complex theory of the law that would allow them to prosecute them for FISA-gate fraud. I hope it happens, but I'm not confident it will. We already had the information out there. The FBI was paying Christopher Steele. They knew his material was garbage. They improperly used Bruce Orr and his wife to launder information targeting Trump to justify the spy operations against Carter Page and others. They all knew it was a lie. They lied to the court. My view, they weren't using Russian intelligence to generate the dossier. My guess is that Christopher Steele's sources were all FBI sources and CIA sources that were laundering information to justify spying on the president. My point is, all of this is out there, largely because of Judicial Watch. We don't need an IG report to begin prosecutions. So whenever you hear we're waiting for the IG report, just know that's excuse-making. So with that, I'm going to bring it forward. And just quickly, every time you hear the word impeachment, you need to substitute the word coup. And I don't know what you're doing. I do know what you're doing. I was here for the intros. But you need to put down what you're doing. Tax policy, whatever policy you're doing, or your business. And you need to take the time over the next few days to communicate with your friends, colleagues, and elected representatives that you want the coup stopped. You need the coup stopped. Because if deep state operatives can decide who's president of the United States, we might as well just go home. Because we've lost the right to govern ourselves. And we have to protect the republic. This is why this is an important meeting. So with that being said, 2 people have been on the front lines. Carter Page, directly targeted with illegal spying. His background is tremendous. He's got all of the necessary professional requirements: PhD, MA, veteran, national security clearance, you used to have at least, confidential informant for the FBI, who they thought then was a spy. He's the expert, and he was the vehicle for targeting Trump. And another vehicle for targeting Trump was General Flynn and Sidney Powell, who wrote a book in 2014 warning us about the very gang that Mueller was hiring, licensed to lie. If you read her book, you would have known what Mueller was going to do. Is now thankfully representing General Flynn, who previously had given $1 million to Eric Holder's law firm to provide him a defense. Now he's getting a defense that money could never possibly buy from Sidney Powell. So I'm going to turn it over to Carter and Sidney. Carter, why don't you go first?
Thanks so much, Tom. That's really the presentation I'm going to speak with you a few minutes about is originally the panel topic was exposing the corruption, but I think, as Tom is alluding to, I have a little different take on it. I call this re-exposing the corruption again. We have had, thanks to the work of Judicial Watch and Sidney's book and what she's doing now in the court case for General Flynn is really, it's been out there. The corruption that was in the deep state pushing this crazy process forward over the last couple of years has been known for quite some time now. And so I'm going to just take a few minutes to just kind of lay the groundwork. And I think these two people sitting next to me are just the gold standard. And I'd like to sort of tie in some of my experiences with what they've been working on and how essential it is in terms of thinking about, as Tom was alluding to, things that we can do going forward. So we talk about whistleblowers, right? And I think, as was discussed over in the introductory brunch, it's the second or third-hand whistleblower in the case of this fake guy, which has been in the headlines over the last couple weeks. Unfortunately, I was a whistleblower. As Tom alluded to, I had been a FBI and CIA informant for many, many years. And when all this started happening very early, I sent a letter to FBI Director Comey in September of 2016 calling this out. Not only did he not respond to my letter, he ended up continuing to do all the same things and actually filed his first fraudulent FISA warrant just less than a month later. I had another whistleblower complaint to the head of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe just a week after the FISA warrant was granted to Mr. Comey and to Sally Yates. And then I had several follow-ups with DOJ, Civil Rights Division, and of course, House Intelligence Committee. And I think, which is, again, House Intelligence Committee, as we saw last week, is again on the front lines. And so it's really deja vu all over again. So I had even prior, along the lines of my prior work for the FBI and CIA, I had it's a long story, but just to make a long story short, I had been a whistleblower, and I told DOJ and the FBI some of the problems with their false or misleading federal court filings even before I joined the Trump campaign as a unpaid volunteer. And unfortunately, a lot of the same patterns as Tom is alluding to were exactly the same things that ended up happening and have continued to happen over the years since. So really there's tons of details, and Judicial Watch has been on the front lines of getting to the bottom of so much information. This first letter that I sent to Director Comey on September 25th, 2016, they never responded. It wasn't until 165 days later that the FBI came back. And meanwhile, they're dealing with this DNC consultant, who's, the DNC is essentially, for all intents and purposes, I say, giving bribes to someone who is also a public servant for the United States, given his role as a paid FBI informant, where I was just a volunteer. So I'll come back to these. These are Mueller footnotes on the right here. But there was some interesting dates, March 30 and March 31, 2017. Most of my meetings were very intermittent, but they wanted to meet with me at the last minute on March 31st, 2017. And this has to do with Sidney's client. So really, there's a lot of great lawyers out there. Unfortunately, for all lawyers in the room, there's a real dark cloud over your profession right now. And if this is allowed to stand, there's really, people having confidence in our justice system is going to be very limited. All four of the judges who signed off on this, they're district judges from across the country. They had been prior U.S. attorneys in various districts across the country for many years. And when they get a fraudulent FISA warrant from other, former U.S. attorneys like Mr. Comey, who was previously the head of the Southern District in New York, or Dana Boente, who's head of Eastern District of Virginia, or Mr. Rosenstein, who just a few months before had been a U.S. attorney in Maryland. They think it's an accurate, honest document, but unfortunately, that was not the case. There's a lot of people think about terrorism if you look at the actual definition of terrorism based on the PATRIOT Act, it is not necessarily blowing up buildings or killing people. It's just acts dangerous to human life that are violations of the criminal law. I would argue that all of the elements of terrorism, either domestic or international, given the fact that you have an international conspiracy working on this, literally ticks all the boxes. You know, that may be more difficult. We could have a debate with some prosecutors about that, but you know, I think just on the face of it, looking at the sheer facts in the law, there's definitely clear evidence of what happened there. So just in that context, you know, the acts dangerous to human life and violations of criminal laws. As Tom was alluding to, this spectacle in the House Intelligence Committee, there was a prior spectacle on March 20, 2017. That morning, Mr. Schiff reads out on all the major networks and he says that, you know, Russian sources, according to this highly respected British intelligence officer, said that I'm having secret meetings with Igor Sechin. That same afternoon, I've had countless death threats, and it's just on the right is just a short clip, heavily redacted, just for keep it clean for this office, but you can kind of see where we're coming from in terms of the constant threats to my life and to other people's lives. I'm by no means the only one who's gone through this. And, you know, again, a lot of the Democrats in the media have been pushing the same thing. That same day, you know, the head of Hillary Clinton's campaign said that, you know, people like myself should be, quote unquote, prosecuted for treason. And so, you know, again, it's just, they're all in bed together, essentially. The question is, what can we do about it? Congressman Devin Nunes, Chairman Lindsey Graham in the Senate, these have been incredible people, but they need a lot of help. Sean Hannity, Tom was on with Sean Hannity on Fox News last night, really helps getting the word out in terms of what has happened and what needs to be done. You know, Sean mentioned about Congressman Nunes. He said he was on fire. The problem is, Congressman Nunes may be on fire, but there is essentially nuclear attacks coming from the other side. Congressman, you know, Chairman Schiff, unfortunately, is just coming out with these completely false conspiracy theories at the same hearing. So, unfortunately, you know, what we saw with Chairman Graham in the Kavanaugh hearing, you know, that was intense fire, but there's only so much political capital that individuals in Congress can do. And I think what we need to keep doing is all of us coming together is keeping to push this process forward. There's been a history of people, you know, FBI and U.S. or Western intelligence sources having their lives put at risk. And this is what we saw in the Sergei Skripal case. You know, he was an intelligence officer, and, you know, very similar to my case, but he actually had much more support from the UK government, which was actually also involved in the joint US-UK mission against the President Trump's, then candidate Trump's campaign in 2016. So I ended up almost half a year later having a bunch of meetings with the FBI, and all I was asking for is, you know, to look at both sides. And unfortunately, over the years that have followed since, they haven't really looked at the other side. This is one of the slides, a slightly edited one that I brought to the one of my meetings with the FBI in March 2017, and unfortunately, they never really followed up on this at all. You know, there really are heavy costs, not only to the president and to individuals, but just from a national security standpoint. If you looked at what happened in 9/11, when these agencies, the FBI and CIA, are being distracted by these criminal lies and these criminal conspiracies, it takes away important assets, and it's really putting lives at risk. And it's exactly what I noted in my letter to Mr. Comey, and saying, you know, let's please have a conversation about this as soon as possible in my whistleblower letter. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. So, you know, really, we've talked already in some of the initial sessions about the First Amendment. Really, what we saw has been the death of the First Amendment. You know, I think what the various conversations with the Attorney General and Congressman Scalise about, you know, these big tech companies. This is an element of the FISA warrant, the FISA code. It says, you know, no U.S. person shall be considered a foreign power based on activities protected by the First Amendment. The only groups that have been protected are the big tech companies. So Yahoo News is the company that published this FISA abuse article, which then was used in the court. Just, you know, the September 23rd, 2016 article, which was then used by Mr. Comey and all of his cabal. Unfortunately, you know, it was based on my just basically giving a totally benign speech and also peaceful meetings with the members of the Trump campaign when I was a volunteer. And really, all of those people got tied into this because, you know, all of my communications with them were also eventually surveilled, you know, on a number of levels. So what's worse than that in terms of these big tech companies. So Yahoo was bought by Verizon, you know, $250 billion plus tech Goliath, one of the biggest telecoms media conglomerates. Unfortunately, they were supported by the Radio Free Europe, which is a U.S. government-funded propaganda source. And these are just a couple of articles, defamatory articles that they had against myself as a way of damaging President Trump. And if you look at, you know, I've had a lot of court filings about this. If you look at some of the details and the connections, the head of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which funds Radio Free Europe, was a top Obama donor, and he was, you know, heavily involved in all these related acts. Again, this is $100 million a year as of 2016, when all this was going on, of U.S. taxpayer-funded money. So we talk about big tech. This is, you know, one of these groups working on this. So let me just tie this back with, in my final minute here, with a couple of the major things that were happening with General Flynn. You know, I mentioned, you know, right at the end of my meetings with the FBI, on March 31st, they wanted to have a surprise last-minute meeting. I had a very strong feeling when I was called at the last minute to meet with the FBI about this. The front-page article on the Wall Street Journal that day was related to, you know, General Flynn and the lovely representation he was getting by Eric Holder's law firm, Covington, at the time. So that's a long story, but there's, you know, a lot more to uncover here. Really, what the people that are here on this panel are just really American heroes. Between Tom's work with his team at Judicial Watch and Sidney, they're really the gold standard. And so, unfortunately, a lot more needs to be done. You know, Tom and Judicial Watch are very focused on Freedom of Information Act. That's the essential foundation of a lot of this. But so much more needs to be done in the legal arena to continue pushing this forward. And, you know, Sidney, we're talking about oxymorons. Someone mentioned that for lawyers. But, you know, she's written books on legal ethics. And unfortunately, you know, there's a serious dark cloud that needs to be really addressed. And there's a lot more to be said on that. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Carter. Thank you. And, you know, before Sidney comes up, and the other side has gone nuclear, and the Republicans are looking for their car keys. That's the response. And Senator Lindsey Graham, I understand, is running for office somewhere. And he's very good on Fox. As his committee, he's chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Did you know that he's a chairman of a committee? And if he's issued a subpoena on any of the issues I'm talking about, it's news to me. So, you're looking for something to do? Call Lindsey Graham up. Say, why hasn't there been a committee-issued subpoena on any of the scandals that have been uncovered by the crew up here? Next up is Sidney Powell, who is, as I said, been doing yeoman's work on behalf of General Flynn, exposing and holding the Justice Department accountable in ways the Justice Department leadership has refused to do, Congress has refused to do, and the media has refused to do. all on behalf of a patriot and a hero, General Mike Flynn.
Thank you all, and thank you, Tom and Carter, for those kind words. It's an honor to talk with you today. I really appreciate your time and your interest in this subject. The future of our republic is on the line in what happens in the next 18 months to 2 years. The rule of law is on the brink of extinction. We already know there is an outrageous double standard, and those that have been in power for at least 20 years, whether they be in the deep state or elected offices, have abused that power to no end to prosecute primarily Republicans and ruin their lives, financially bankrupt them, put them in prison. We do have political prisoners in this country now, and people are afraid to speak out as conservatives in many areas because of the fear of retribution, whether it be from Antifa or from prosecutorial terrorist tactics that we witnessed being practiced against Paul Manafort and Roger Stone. The FBI did not used to do that, the early morning pre-dawn raids at gunpoint with 30 agents and search Ms. Manafort in her bed while she had a gun pointed at her nose. That is just not a permissible tactic. Carter's right. Those are terrorist tactics. I've been calling them prosecutorial terrorist tactics for several years now. Those are tactics that used to be reserved by prosecutors for drug dealers and gun runners, people for whom and against whom the agents had to fear losing their lives if they didn't go in and catch them off guard or worry about the destruction of evidence, none of which existed with respect to Roger Stone or Paul Manafort, both of whom were actually cooperating with the investigation and would have turned themselves in had they been asked to do so. So we have seen prosecutors just literally run wild with their unbridled power. They are unsupervised. They have absolute immunity from civil suits themselves. They have no supervision to speak of. And once Robert Mueller testified in front of the House Intel Committee, I think it was, or Judiciary Committee, we learned for sure that he wasn't really in charge of the investigation. I already knew that because as soon as he picked Andrew Weissman as his lead henchman, I knew that's exactly who was running it. And frankly, I think Weissman and Rosenstein and a few other people picked Mr. Mueller as opposed to the other way around. So there has been a lot going on behind the scenes in the Department of there's a chapter in the book that's called the Department of Injustice that I characterized it as that after the Ted Stevens prosecution. What I identified and talk about in the book starts back in 2001 under the Bush administration when Michael Chertoff and Larry Thompson and Bob Mueller and a few other people handpicked this group of prosecutors and put them on the Enron task force, untethered them from the Department of Justice, and told them to go ferret out the white-collar crooks. Well, yes, there were a few white-collar crooks at Enron who actually stole money from Enron and certainly made some bad business judgments, but they cast a net far too wide in their effort to get high-value targets. If you're a CEO or a CFO, you are a high-value target to overly ambitious prosecutors who want to punch their tickets to seven-figure salaries in international law firms, or they want to become Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice, like Leslie Caldwell and Matthew Friedrich, both of whom were on the Enron task force, or they want to become Chief White House Counsel, the longest-serving one for Barack Obama, who was Catherine Rumler, who prosecuted the Merrill Lynch defendants in the Merrill Lynch Enron-related litigation. In that case, they made up charges in the indictment. They criminalized innocent business conduct, but they were still able, by doing that, to send 4 innocent Merrill Lynch executives to prison for a year on a made-up charge, while they yellow highlighted but hid the evidence that showed they were innocent. So they knew before the trial exactly what evidence they needed to hide. They had yellow highlighted it themselves. They had surgically excised it from the summaries they gave the defense team of what the evidence said. And these 4 Merrill Lynch executives went to prison for up to a year for doing their jobs, Judge Werlein said, as he sentenced them to prison. Enron made $53 million off that transaction. No one lost any money. Merrill had only made $775,000, and the defendants didn't take any money. They were at Merrill Lynch doing their jobs that day. But that happened because they had already destroyed Arthur Andersen, again on a made-up indictment. They pieced together parts of 2 different statutes to make a crime out of something that wasn't. They, of course, had brought the might and weight of the entire federal government down to bear on Andersen. They knew that the indictment of Andersen would destroy the company, so they sealed it for a week while they worked behind the scenes to avoid upheaval in the markets, because Andersen represented 2,500 publicly traded companies. So they couldn't just, open the indictment and say Andersen's been indicted. They had to do that work behind the scenes before the indictment was unsealed. And of course, as soon as they unsealed it, yes, I think 160 civil litigants piled on Andersen, and its 85,000 jobs worldwide were destroyed with the stroke of the pen on the indictment and its unsealing. And President Bush had personally authorized the destruction of Andersen. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it so that when they knocked on the door of any other company thereafter, that company would give them whatever they wanted to avoid the death penalty that was just dealt to Arthur Andersen. And knock on other companies' doors they certainly have. That's why the 4 Merrill Lynch executives were offered up as sacrificial lambs from Merrill Lynch. The Enron task force even installed an overseer in Merrill Lynch for 18 months to review anything that prosecutor wanted to review about Merrill Lynch's transactions for those 18 months, including the bills of the defense lawyers. It was unprecedented intrusion into the workings of the company and the defense team itself. And there were any number of provisions of that agreement, the non-prosecution agreement that Merrill Lynch worked out, that were unconstitutional but never got litigated. So then, as I proceeded through the Merrill Lynch case, where I represented one of the Merrill executives, it took me 6 years to uncover the evidence they had hidden. They weren't satisfied with the first conviction and the year in prison that they got of most of the executives. So 3 of them, after we got it reversed in the Fifth Circuit, they were going to put to trial a second time on an indictment that said even less than the first indictment did. No problem for these prosecutors. Never mind, it looked like a piece of Swiss cheese. They had to redact out all their, quote, honest services allegations because there was no deprivation of honest services by anyone in the case unless it was Andrew Fastow, who was Enron's CFO, but it certainly wasn't the responsibility of the Merrill Lynch executives. So in the process of preparing for the second trial, after my client got out of prison for a year while his appeal was pending, we couldn't even get him bail pending appeal. I mean, that's how bad it is. The standard shifted a while back in our effort to enforce criminal law to keep people or put people in prison as soon as they're convicted. In fact, that's why Steve Stockman, former Congressman Steve Stockman, is in prison right now. His appeal has not been heard yet, but the district judge sent him to prison immediately, not even allowing him to stay out to help with his appeal, because they have the power to do that. They can do it to anybody. And what I've realized through this whole process is if the government wants you in prison, you will go. There isn't anyone who can survive the scrutiny that special counsel's office gave if they want to find a document that they allege is mortgage fraud, even though you're paying your mortgage. If you take out a home equity loan and you say you're going to add on to your house, but you've got $30,000 left over and you go buy a boat, that can be indicted as mortgage fraud or a false statement to a bank. I mean, there are so many laws and regulations out there that have been criminalized and over-criminalized. Anyone can be indicted if they set their sights on you, and they will put you right in prison upon your conviction. We can look at the Rafikian case that just came out of the Eastern District of Virginia, in which General Flynn's former business partner was indicted and convicted of conspiracy and a violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 951, which criminalizes someone being an agent of a foreign power. It's a spy statute. It was designed to be a spy statute. All these guys did was publish an op-ed in The Hill. First Amendment protected activity. They published an op-ed in The Hill about Fethullah Gulen and his charter schools around the country subsidized by our tax dollars while he's raising little jihadis. And I know Flynn had to have been under investigation before then, because an op-ed in The Hill doesn't just automatically trigger a FARA inquiry from the Department of Justice within 2 weeks. And that's exactly what happened. And that started the process of targeting him, although I'm convinced he was under investigation probably from even before he left as Director of National Intelligence in the Obama administration, because he'd been so active in speaking out against Ms. Clinton's abuses and the whole problem of radical Islam and Benghazi and any number of things. So there is no telling how long he was under surveillance. I think the FISA application against Carter was actually used to cover up a lot of wrongdoing by the National Security Division of the Department of Justice, which still needs to be cleaned out with fire hoses and Clorox, along with most of the rest of the Department of Justice. You know, we have got to start speaking up and speaking out and demanding the equal application of the rule of law. I know Attorney General Barr believes in it. I don't know why it is taking so long. We don't have to make the most complicated case. In fact, those are the most dangerous. McCabe committed 3 acts of lying under oath when he had an attorney. He knew exactly what the investigation was about. The conversations were recorded. It was to the Inspector General. And 18 months, a year, no indictment yet of McCabe. One of the things, if you want to do something that would help, is encourage the president right now to fire the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia and hire someone for that job who has the chutzpah to take care of it and deal with what needs to be done. That's one of the most crucial districts in the country, but yet the Awan brothers, the Pakistanis, who stole millions of dollars in equipment from Congress and were implicated in a conspiracy with 40 congressmen that involved sending classified information, God only knows where, out of the country through Dropbox. One of them got off with nothing. The other one got a slap on the hand. I don't think he was put in prison at all, and immediately shipped out of the country to hide it all. He's the one that left Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop in a phone booth for her to pick up later. I mean, there's just one violation after the other and one example after the other of how people have been treated so differently depending on whether they were conservatives or Democrats. That has got to stop. And that means that Republicans have to stand up and be willing to enforce the law when they have the ability to do so. And there has to be a penalty, a serious penalty, against at least 50 people who were involved in this coup. And it can start with indictments as simple as the 3 perjury counts against Andrew McCabe and against Mr. Comey for lying to Congress. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It doesn't have to be a huge, complicated case. The most effective prosecutions are the most simple and the most cut and dried. You can do 10 of those in the time frame it would take to do one of an overarching conspiracy, and accomplish the same result. And that is putting the people who need to see some time in prison there.
That's great. Well, wasn't that a great presentation? And thank you, Carter, and thank you, Sidney. We'll have a book signing for Sidney right after this for her License to Lie book. Pray for General Flynn. Pray for Carter Page. There are a lot of other witnesses whose lives have been destroyed by the Mueller criminal investigation. Pray for the president. In my view, he's all alone. You see politicians yelling about impeachment in a political way, but not in this concern, not with the concern I think that ought to be expressed about the attack on our constitutional republic. And the president's leadership here has been key. Attorney General Barr, you'll notice, is personally involved in these trips that the Democrats are upset about. And it highlights the need for individual leadership here. It's not going to get done if we just say, let's let the regular process run its course. We need this dramatic intervention, which is going to obviously cause the other side to scream. And this is why it's important that the public be out there advocating this dramatic intervention for transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. Because right now, our republic is under attack. If the Democrats can get away with it, they'll impeach the president 3 or 4 times before the end of, before the election. It's that serious. So the question is, what are you going to do next? I would suggest that another topic, another specific action is call Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and your senators and ask them to foreclose any impeachment trial on this fraudulent coup effort being run out of the House right now. Announce now that there will be a vote to cast aside the current requirements on the rules that the Senate immediately take up an impeachment resolution by the House and proceed until they handle it. It's the rule of the Senate, but rules can be changed, as Nancy Pelosi tells us. And I think Mitch McConnell should say, we're not playing this game, and it's not going to go anywhere. And that will further take the wind out of the sails of what potentially, the good news is potentially faltering coup impeachment effort. And we'll talk about more ideas as to what we can do to address not only the current crisis, but the institutional crises that Carter and Sidney have described in the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, the State Department, the Office Director of National Intelligence, the intelligence committees that oversee them, the National Security Council, the Office Director of National Intelligence. So we just have a few things to talk about. And we'll talk about the coup crisis in our action session after the general program here this afternoon. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and we'll see you in a few minutes with, I guess Frank Gaffney's coming up next on the other crisis, the threat from China. Thank you.